Hello guys, today we're going to honor Bishop John Hurst Adams. Bishop John Hurst Adams contributed handsomely to this world in so many beautiful ways. However, today we're going to focus on his contributions to Seattle, Washington. He had a fruitful childhood, as his dad was an A&E minister and his mom and dad alike ensured that he had the best education, upbringing, and tools possible to succeed in life. Now here's the fun fact. Bishop John Hurst Adams went to college at 15 years old. 15. The college he attended was John C. Smith University, which is located in Charlotte, South Carolina, and he got his bachelor's degree in history. Here is another interesting fact. Bishop John Hurst Adams attended Boston University to get his master's and bachelor's degree in sacred theology. There, he became friends with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. After college, Bishop John Hurst Adams started working at Payne Theological Seminary in Ohio. Around this time is when he met the beautiful Dr. Dolly DeSalle Adams, while she was working as the department head of the elementary education department at Wilberforce University. Part of Bishop John Hurst Adams' foundation can be attributed to his parents, who were also involved in civil rights and who rubbed that on his foundation. Also, he was a contemporary of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Another fun fact, after marrying Dr. Dolly Adams, Bishop John Hurst Adams became the youngest president of a college, that college being Paul Quinn College in Texas. Eventually, Bishop Adams was assigned to First AME Church in Seattle, Washington. The thing to understand about around this time or the time before is that many cities in America had neighborhoods specifically for blacks, where blacks were particularly concentrated in due to segregation. And these neighborhoods were the schools for the people of color, the hospitals for the people of color, the homes for the people of color, the stores for people of color, and so on and so forth. During the Civil Rights era, especially after all these different cases came about, like the Brown versus the Board of Education and the signing of the Civil Rights Acts, African Americans and people of color now have an opportunity to broaden their horizons. And by broadening their horizons, I mean they have the opportunity to get better housing, better health care, better jobs, better education, and more. The concentrated area for blacks in Seattle, Washington at the time was called the Central Area. When he arrived to Seattle, Washington with his family, he immediately got involved in social action. Bishop Adams became the chair of the Central Area Civil Rights Committee. In Seattle, Washington, this organization became the umbrella organization for other organizations that supported people of color, like the NAACP, CORE, Black churches, and the Seattle Urban League. Essentially, the Central Area Civil Rights Committee made these organizations stronger, as now these black organizations work together in Seattle. In the last video that I did, we talked about the Triad Plan that the Seattle Urban League spearheaded under the leadership of Edwin Thomas Pratt. The Triad Plan was the key that opened the door to opportunities for desegregation in Seattle, Washington, right? It was presented to the school board. Now here is the thing. The Seattle School Board maintained that voluntary transfer and compensatory education was good enough to support desegregation of the school system. Reverend John Hurst Adams said this: "I consider the whole compensatory education program a deception and a fraud. The very name defeats its purpose. It says to the Negro children that they have learned less than they should. They accept it, believe it, and do as little as possible." So just to review, the Seattle Urban League's triad plan would have actively integrated the children, right? By making zones and matching different schools. Whereas the school board's plan was just to stick with voluntary transfer and compensatory education. Compensatory education is basically education that, like remedial education. So if you're behind, you'll just basically get courses that you should have gotten, but this compensatory program is basically the school board saying, "I'm sorry, here's stuff you should have learned." And of course, voluntary transfer is like going to whatever school you want to, depending on if there's space. In fact, de facto segregation can make segregation hard to prove. And this is what the Black community was up against in Seattle: de facto segregation. De facto segregation is using policies to make it seem like something is desegregated, but in fact, it is still segregated. In this situation, Blacks are still concentrated in the Central District. Using voluntary transfer and compensatory education was not an effective enough way to desegregate. Civil rights activists were seeing it like this: we want to take this plant, this beautiful flower, out of an area where it's not thriving, right? And in order to do that, we have to pick it up from the root and then transport it into other places where it can grow and flourish. At the same time, we want to take other plants from thriving areas and move them into areas so that these other areas can be blessed. That's what the triad plan aimed to do, right? Now, the school board's plan, in my opinion, was just to pick out the leaves, not get to the root. They didn't see fit to give the triad plan a chance. The triad plan, like most plans in civil rights, aim to do things peacefully. That's always the first go-to. Always the first go-to after years and years of fighting peacefully. But it gets to a point where we have to get in good trouble sometimes. And that's what Reverend John Hurst Adams and many others did. They got into good trouble. Under the leadership of Reverend John Hurst Adams, the Central Area Civil Rights Committee, the NAACP, and other organizations and individuals, a boycott was organized with the aim of forcefully desegregating the Seattle school system. Now, the school board argued that boycotting schools would be of an injustice to the students. Civil rights activists and others in the community argue that a boycott was necessary because the voices of the people of color were not being heard. The organizers of the boycott created letters and pamphlets. They sent them out to the parents of the students to inform them that they were boycotting and why they were boycotting, and it suggested that they keep their children out of the regular Seattle school system for 2 days. The organizers of the boycott did not want the students to see this boycott as a vacation, so they made it an enriching boycott. The organizers of the boycott organized freedom schools, temporary freedom schools for the 2 days, in which students would be able to go to in lieu of the regular Seattle schools. Where were the freedom schools held at? First AME Church, the church that Reverend John Hurst Adams was the pastor at, a YMCA center, a Masonic lodge, other churches and places as such are where these freedom schools were located in the 2 days of the boycott. The aim of the freedom schools was to give the students a broader and more comprehensive education, a taste of it at least, of what it would be like if the schools were integrated. It consisted of white and black students, or a mixture of races. It consisted of a mixture of races and teachers as well. Freedom schools had solid material to teach the students, and it even touched on areas such as African history. And that was the boycott. Absentia from regular Seattle schools and temporarily in freedom schools for 2 days. Boycotting peacefully, at the same time gaining knowledge. And this was not the last boycott. It was a constant battle. And eventually the NAACP would get involved and there would be lawsuits, and it was a constant battle. But we can thank people like Bishop John Hurst Adams for his good trouble. Malcolm Brogdon of the Indiana Pacers is Bishop John Hurst Adams' grandson. And he is an example of how a legacy should be honored. He recently honored his grandfather's legacy by partaking in protests that stood against police brutality. All of the sources are at the end of this video. Thanks for watching, and thanks for letting me share.